Good morning, and welcome to Lesson 43 in our study of the book of Romans. Today we're going to start chapter 12, just the first two verses, and these are two of the most probably studied and quoted verses in the Bible. There have been multiple commentaries, there have been books written about these verses, multiple videos have been done, so I don't want to make this too complicated, and I'll try to make it as short as possible. Paul has been giving us, through the first 11 chapters of the book of Romans, he's given us really the principles of God, the principles upon which God grants salvation and upon which may provoke his wrath. He's also given us the problems of God, the problems that God has undertaken for us, the problems that we have made, and the fact that we have been enabled through God's mercy and His grace to come back into communion with Him, not only ourselves, the Gentiles, but also the Hebrews. He mentioned that this was like a large tree in which initially the Hebrews had been cut off because they considered Christ a stumbling block to their beliefs in the law. And because of that, we were able to come into the tree and be grafted onto the tree as additional branches. Pardon me. But now God has also made plans for the Jewish nation to be grafted back into the same tree as well, after they have come to accept Christ, which they will eventually probably do. So now he's into this last part of the book of Romans, starting with chapter 12, where it's really about the practice of the gospel. And these first two verses talk about our commitment to Christ. So it starts off with, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Paul starts us off by saying, I beseech you, brethren. I urge you earnestly. I request that you really follow this. It's not a command, it is an urging, a strong emphasis on trying to do this. I beseech you, brethren. It's a phrase which he uses a lot in a number of his letters. And it's really implying an urgency, a very strong request that these people, brethren, by the mercies of God, because of the mercies that God has shown us, that we do this. It's really the core of our commitment to God. And we do it because of His appeal in this phrase, I beseech you, brethren, it's due to the response to this appeal and the response to the assessment because of what God has done, the mercies that God has provided for us as outlined in the first 11 chapters of this book. And mercies which if we think about it, are very obvious to all of us. So by this appeal and through these mercies, He wants our response to give to Him, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice. Now, when this was being written, the Jewish people sacrificed animals all the time to cover up their sins. And the sacrifice was one in which the animal would be killed, the blood sprinkled upon and around the altar for the sins of the people, and sometimes the flesh eaten. But it was considered, the burning of the sacrifice was considered to be a very sweet flavor or savor to the Lord. He's not talking about sacrificing here, as many people and many pagan religions used to do in sacrificing their children and young people to their gods. He's talking about taking ourselves as we live and making ourselves available to God, doing God's will, and undertaking God's will, that we sacrifice, we commit ourselves to Him as a living sacrifice, holy, complete, above board, without blemish, as much as possible, because we're still human. None of us are perfect. So we present ourselves a living sacrifice to God, holy. It has to do because of man's complete ruin in sin. This is the problem that man is in. None of us are without sin. And since God is perfect and cannot look upon sin, all of us are condemned. This is what Paul talked about in the first 11 chapters. All of us have been condemned, but He made a perfect remedy through Christ. And if we are all condemned, and Christ paid the price of our punishment, then we should present ourselves, accept this, as a living sacrifice to Him, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. Now apparently the Greek word used for reason here is the same word from which we get our word logical. So another way of putting this is, because of what Christ did for us and what God did for us through Christ, it is our logical service to repay Him by sacrificing ourselves as a living sacrifice to Christ. You see, we need this because, as it says in Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. We cannot do this by ourselves. This is why Christ had to do it for us. And as a result of this, it's our logical service, our reasonable service, to repay Christ by dedicating ourselves to His service. This is what He says by doing a living sacrifice, is by dedicating ourselves to His service. Because God did this for us. God's put Christ to the test and put Christ through the agonies of crucifixion for our benefits. It says in Isaiah 53:10, "Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise Him," Christ. He has put Him to grief. So this is the basis by which it makes it logical for us to repay that deed that Christ did for us by giving ourselves as a living sacrifice, by dedicating ourselves to Him while we are yet alive on this earth. So it says, "I beseech you, I urge you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God," because of the mercies of God, because of the mercies that God has shown to us, is outlined in the first 11 chapters of this book, that you present your bodies mean your heart, soul, spirit, your entirety, your bodies, a living sacrifice, a dedicated type of sacrifice to God, acceptable to God, in a manner which is acceptable to God. And this is your logical service. And because of this, if you are going to do this, then be not conformed to this world. This world that we're in, the general system, this age that we're in, is very secular. And it really goes on 4 main principles. It's the attainment of wealth, the attainment of prestige, it's the attainment of power, it's the attainment of pleasure. Now, all of these things in and of themselves are not necessarily wrong. There's nothing wrong with becoming famous or obtaining some prestige. There's nothing wrong with obtaining some wealth. There's certainly nothing wrong with having pleasure, but it should be done with the knowledge that we do it with Christ as the forefront, and not just in a hedonistic sort of way. You obtain your wealth by honest means. You obtain your fame and prestige by honest means. Likewise, your pleasures and your power. We see right now what's going on in the world, what one man's quest for power is doing. This is completely opposite to the type of quest for power that should be done in a manner which is pleasing to God. So this is the general 4 principles upon which the world functions. And it says, be not conformed to these principles. Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed. The word for transformation is the same word that was used when Christ was transfigured on the mountain. It's a change in your being. It's a change in your personality, a change in your entire outlook. It's a change in you as a whole. And some people can certainly see this when it happens. We've seen it happen many times. That you be transformed by the renewing of your mind, by the use of your mind towards those things and those aspects and those principles which are pleasing to God, not which are necessarily just for your own hedonistic purposes of pleasure and power and fame and prestige. By a transforming of your mind, by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove, that you may show through your actions, through your words, through your speech, through your activities on a day-to-day basis, that you may show and may prove what the good and acceptable and perfect will of God generally is. Now, as I said, none of us are perfect. None of us are going to do this all the time to a perfection. But with God's help, and with this type of impetus in our system and in our being, we can certainly do it to a large extent of the time and show the world what it is like to be a true Christian. There is nothing wrong with obtaining power or wealth or fame or having pleasure. And this can all be done in a way which is both pleasing, good for the world, and pleasing to God. So these first 2 verses in chapter 12 really give us the start of the Christian life, the practice of the gospel. And it talks about the commitment of Christ, the commitment to Christ, the characteristics of that commitment, that is a conscious, that is complete, that it is costly, because it does cost something to do this. It's constructive, it's ceremonial, but its big thing is that it's voluntary. It is by our own will that we present ourselves. We present our bodies. It's not forced upon us. It is not given us as an order. It is Paul asking us, urging us, but asking us to present our bodies voluntarily to Christ as a living sacrifice, as a person, as beings who will do the will of God, who will consider and undertake the principles that God wants us to take and do. So the idea is, in these 2 verses, as we start chapter 12, that there's a change. There should be a change, that we accept the fact that if we believe in what God, through Christ, did for us, that we should have a change come in our beings, so that we are able to become, in a way, presentable to God. And we do this voluntarily, giving ourselves as a living type of sacrifice, sacrificing this world's schemes, this world's programs, sacrificing those as a living sacrifice to God, which is logical for us to do, considering what God did for us. So that we have no longer a means, we don't become entrapped in bondage to this world's schemes of obtaining all the things that it wants us to obtain. But we transform ourselves into being a type of person which is holy and acceptable and shows what is good and meaningful and perfect in God's will. This is the true meaning of these first two verses. And I'm going to stop there because that really is sufficient. If we can grasp that, that's plenty. So we'll get on to the further part, the next few verses in chapter 12 next week. But that's enough for today. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.